And the document itself, what happened to that?
It got printed and published, and it's also online. It was printed and published as kind of mini newspapers. We fundraised, and I think about 60,000 copies got distributed, which had the mini version of the cultural plan. And actually we made the cultural document an artistic artifact in two ways. One is as a physical object, curated, designed, printed and manufactured in a particular way, distributed in special ways, in ordinary ways, and also with institutions. And the process itself, we felt, was the artifact, the way of making our work transparent. I mentioned online. The physical document can be downloaded as a PDF at the City Hall website, london.gov.uk. It's a London Cultural Plan, or there's also London Cultural and Creative Quarter. It was distributed in 2003 across London. People could write in and we mailed them copies. We had versions of it available as audio tape and in Braille. The actual launch of it, we did two things. We had a series of quiet and not so quiet activities in the lead up to the launch of the cultural plan, which included taking over City Hall as a place of cultural production, so that new work and old work was made and shown, ranging from Michael Nyman playing piano live and Ben Ockley reading his poetry live, a poem he wrote about London, beautiful poem, seeing youth projects using the external and internal spaces, objects made, people coming in, opening up the building as a space for Londoners, inaugurating the living room at the top. But it also included curating an exhibition at the Photographers Gallery, where we had photographers such as Jürgen Teller, Martin Parr, Dorothy Bone, and mums and refugees who had taken photographs of London. 12 pictures, I think, one for each month. So you had this kind of high art going on and this everyday stuff happening, which we invested in as a launch. Then you had this beautiful object on paper, going around London, traveling abroad. I took a few copies away when I traveled. And I think it created its own track. It created a reverie around the object and a knowledge of the process behind it. I think it's got very extraordinary and magical language about it, quite poetic. And at the same time, academics, policymakers, people who are quite determined to make things happen in the societies, use that document in physical form and from the online downloadable version. They made use of that as a tool and instrument for them to push processes they need to make happen. So it gave them a language they could borrow freely. Creative Commons is the best way to look at it. And it helped validate areas of practice which people felt were not that important or were really not good enough to be put in front of people. So to this day now, it's 8 years since the plan was published, it's downloaded, it's used, and it's influential even in the current City Hall of Boris Johnson, the Conservative Mayor of London. And there's now a new strategy group who are implementing and creating planning. They're essentially unconsciously using our learning, of course, and our template. It doesn't really matter that they are, but I just feel that there has been a join in that process, a continuation. There was a lot of rhetoric at the change of government in 2008 between Ken Livingstone and Boris Johnson, whether or not some of the processes of government, especially the cultural planning process, would continue and survive. They have. They've been replenished. And what's extraordinary was, I think all of us across society were united in that physical document in recognizing together what was important. Although we had the usual politically motivated critique and acclaim for the document, left and right, I think what's happened is that we can now see that that physical document is used unwittingly or knowledgeably by politicians, committee members, artists, policymakers, and it's being reformulated. And I'm glad to say that it is feeling a little bit dated. And I'm hopeful that the process, which is now invisible, I think, there's not so much focus on the document because we've done the original documents. I'd like to feel that the process is very much alive and there. And certainly we know sitting here today that, again, the interlocutor and myself, that we feel pretty confident about the way against recession, against a really extraordinary moment of flux for the planet, that the cultural process and its role in generating society is pretty well established in London, and I hope pretty well established in the UK. And I think that Londoners, including its policymakers, understand sometimes about having to go it alone. And I think that's what's tremendous about that document, is that it represented going it alone, but on behalf of some very vital processes and some very important people, where Londoners and artists equally. So it's worth visiting the website to look at that, but also to know that you'll be impatient about wanting to propose a better way of putting across a creative cultural planning process. Perhaps you have a better template. We need to hear about that, so we need to share. If anything, that document was an awkward coalition of interests coming together to put disparate interests and the hybridity of knowledge culture onto paper to make it usable for policymakers. So do bear in mind, we're pretty explicit about it, that document was for policymakers to use, but we felt policymakers were ordinary Londoners and non-Londoners, and those who may not even have a typical language to express their participation in something. So that document, I think, it's like any artifact, like any art object, it has an intent behind it, but what's far more important is your response today to that, not your retrospective discovery of what it was about. Maybe it's interesting for some people to discover how did it come about, but I think it's just as equally significant that people come to a new and different, revised understanding of what that process and that document is about. And I'm very happy if people go to that document now and in fact don't recognize their world in it, because it just means that they are capable of understanding and expressing the difference that they experience, the difference that I experience there.